Welcome to episode 1 of my podcast, 22nd Century Science. My name's Paul Westron. Don't forget to watch episode 0, because this is the second episode. Yep, I know. Anyway, this one's about collision graphs. Back in 1997, I began an astrology experiment that ended up giving unprecedented results. 9 years previously, I'd read a book called How to Rectify a Birth Chart by someone called Laurie Efrin. Now, this is the kind of book you'll only read if you're interested in learning about astrology. You're not going to read this sort of book under any other circumstances. But it had in it a maxim that was really interesting for me. And remember, I didn't have a teacher. I was teaching myself astrology, and I taught myself astrology for 15 years. So I didn't speak to another astrologer for 15 years. So anyway, what Laurie said was, astrological transits, which is the sky at the moment, or any particular moment, happen to you. They show things that happen to you. But progressions change you from the inside. So effectively what she's saying is, progressions are the unfolding of your birth chart, the unfolding of your life. So I made some assumptions based on what she wrote that made me think, okay, so basically what that means is progressions are the unfolding horoscope. They're the moving horoscope. So in that case, they should also work in synastry, relationship astrology. So aspects between progressed charts should have an effect. So I didn't have any other sources at the time to tell me that this was the case. I came across a few that had mentioned it, but at the time I didn't have any other sources. But I thought that that would be an established part of astrology and I would learn about it later in some other book. So basically I had some assumptions and they were based on this idea. So I went and did this experiment, and effectively it took about 23 years to complete it. But the first part of it took somewhere around about 7 years, and it involved gathering a lot of data, a lot of public record data, famous people and their relationships, and the date that they began, and the significant astrological aspects involved in the progressed chart as well as the natal chart, both together, at the time the relationship began. So anyway, I had this extraordinary outcome from this experiment, but I had no way to demonstrate it without using astrological symbols. I created this little matrix called a synastry matrix, which I used to calculate by hand and eye all of the aspects that I was counting. So I counted aspects manually by recognizing them in a matrix. And this is something that astrologists can do, but it takes a lot of understanding about what means what in astrology in order to be able to recognize a semi-sextile or a trine or a square using this kind of method. And you can't see 72 or 36 or 45 degree aspects or 135 degree aspects, so they're excluded to start with. So it was suggested to me I needed a graph of some sort. So after some experimentation, I came up with this. Now this is a collision graph. Now the first ones I created were for Bob Geldof and Paula Yates, Charles and Diana, and probably the third would have been Chris Evans and Billy Piper, I think. We're talking about way back here. We're in year 2000 and something very early on. So I started in 1997. And I concluded my first experiment in around about 2004, which was about the same time that I moved from Britain to Australia. And it was around this time that it was Gary Phillipson, who was an astrologer and a PhD, Dr. Gary Phillipson now, who suggested that I needed a graph. So I went away and tried to find one, and this is what I came up with. So they first appeared in the book When Stars Collide in 2000, which was published in 2006. The collision graph depicts the development of an astrological aspect. Now, it can be in one chart between your progressed planets or progressed and natal planets, or between two charts, between two people's charts, which then involves 4 charts. So if it's just about yourself, so say it's your Mars and your Sun and how it's progressing and whether or not you're getting aspects between the two planets in your progressed and natal chart, that takes 2 charts. If we're looking at progressed charts in synastry, we're looking at 4 charts, 2 natal charts, 2 progressed charts. But we come up with, every time, a single graph. And that's basically the trajectory of the relationship between the 2 planets. So if your Sun is at 15 degrees Leo and your partner's Venus is at 15 degrees Sagittarius, that is a 120 degree aspect. So what we see is if the Venus is moving and the Sun is in your natal chart and the Venus is in your partner's progressed chart, and it moves from 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 degrees of Sagittarius, we'll see that form become exact and then fade. And that's what a progressed synastry aspect looks like. So we can use them to qualitatively measure a quantitative outcome. So because we saw, or I saw, lots of progressed Sun, progressed Venus trines in my study to start with, I thought maybe I should be following these through time and having a look. And the first one I looked at was Paul Yates and Bob Geldof, and it was amazing what I saw. So we can use them in synastry and we can use them in life astrology. The synastry graph, we've seen that. Now look at a life graph. This is an example of a life graph. This is a Sun-Mars aspect in the chart of Benito Mussolini. And you'll see how it comes into its exact square in 1922, which is the year he took power in Italy. What we can tell from synastry graphs is basically how the intensity of an event in consciousness develops, forms, develops and fades. Now an event in consciousness might be falling in love with someone or being attracted to someone or having a relationship with someone. That's an event in consciousness. It's not an event in nature. It's not like the eruption of a volcano or a weather event or an earthquake, which are events in nature. An event in consciousness involves a human being or 2 human beings. So in your life it might be some success that you achieve. In the case of Benito Mussolini, he became dictator of Italy in 1923. So his event in consciousness was taking power. So these are the things that we can tell from synastry graphs and from life graphs. So you might ask the question, well, what does that mean for me? Well, as far as synastry graphs are concerned, we can see how your relationships will change. Now that doesn't mean that we'll see how your relationships end, but obviously we can look at relationships that you've had in the past, and then we can probably give you a reason why they ended. We can also say whether or not a relationship looks like it's going to be promising in the future. But one of the things about these graphs is that they act like a little bit like windows of opportunity in synastry. They're entrances, not necessarily entrances and exits, they're entrances. As an aspect forms and fades, it's showing that a particular window opened and closed. And so what happened within that window is probably very important. That's where you make your memories. So relationships go on longer than these aspects last for. These aspects just open you up for these relationships. And so it's very important to remember that because an aspect's gone doesn't mean your relationship will go. It just means that your relationship will change. And one of the very few things that we have, one of the very few pieces of evidence that we have that a relationship has changed is that it ended. So yeah, obviously we look at that. But anyway, it's not as important as the fact that the relationship has changed. So the same with the life graphs. You have these moments in time and moments in your life that are very intense. So in the case of Mussolini, he had a very peak moment in 1923. And in a later podcast, I'll show you how so many other leaders and dictators have had these moments too. But he had a very important moment in 1923. It wasn't his the only important moment in his life, but it was a very critical one when it came to his use of power and his taking of power. So and it's something that you can use in your life. If you know that you're going to get a Sun and Mars aspect coming up at some point in your life, that is going to be the time when you need to be in a position to take some kind of action to improve your life, or to improve the life of others, or improve the lives of your family or people you care about. These are times where you get agency and power and the ability to make a difference. The same goes for, there are lots of different types of life aspect and lots of different types of life, and the planets that progress during your life. I can also show, and I may do at some point, how these may be involved in the end of life scenario, but I'm not going to do that straight away. Anyway, so you've been listening to 22nd Century, or watching 22nd Century Science. My name's Paul Westron, and I'll be back next week demonstrating that astrology is not what you thought it was.
It's still in the game. Somebody's pulling your chain. About 22nd century science.